video here is a fan art for Highrollers D&D stream for their second campaign called Aerois of the character Sanna. This first part here is a procreate time-lapse of me doing the sketches, preparation, research, and posing. I used a couple things to help me do the pose, a pose figurine I got for Christmas, and I also looked up different references. Now, Sanna is an NPC from this campaign that was really cool and interesting, so I decided I wanted to draw her before the player characters in this campaign, but I'm probably going to do some fan art of the player characters as well. I also made this so I could actually send it in to the official people, and hopefully it ends up in a fan art video with their official fan art videos and during their uploads of the streams. Before I even got to this step, I was posing out my model and doing research and reference, so I had to look up different things to help. So I looked up armor designs, athletic tops, rabbits, metal armored boots, and leather armor separately, and I looked up the actual Final Fantasy XIV rabbit people, which this one is supposed to be inspired by. I used all that reference put together to work on this. Now, when I was working on this, I also went back to the episode that this was in and wrote out the exact words he used to describe her. He never mentioned her skin or eye color, so I was thinking it would be really interesting if I actually made her skin, though it's not furry in most areas, it's skin, if I made it two-tone, so a browner color and a more pale skin tone. And I'm really happy with that because I think it looks more interesting. I also added a little tiny bit of brown into the ears and tail, although they were described as being white. This section's done in Clip Studio Paint. So Dungeons & Dragons streams are lots of fun. The best one is Critical Role. I think the Highrollers Aerois is also a very good one. The world of Aerois is very interesting, and the player characters are interesting, but they're a bit too good aligned. They tend to be ridiculously over-generous, and they give away way too much of their money, even when they earned it, and they need it actually, as well as a bit too much on the not attacking the obvious enemy, and too often trying to avoid lethal confrontation even when it's clearly not easily avoided. Now, I have no problem with people playing good aligned characters that avoid killing things immediately. As a dungeon master, I'm happier when my players try to find non-lethal options, but only when the option's logical and makes any sense at all. Sometimes these players don't act aggressively when they obviously should. In a recent episode, there was a wyvern that came out of the woods with a club tail and iron plates on it, and they still almost seemed to want to avoid fighting it, and it was an obvious situation that you had to fight. So there's some situations like that, and they're too generous with trying to give money away in a way that just doesn't seem realistic to how anyone in the world or a fantasy world would ever act. Like, I understand wanting to be charitable, but if you're stranded out in the lowlands and it's dangerous and you just risk your life to earn a bunch of money, why would you give any of it away, let alone all of it? I mean, I can understand giving a bit away maybe now and then, but it's 400 gold to heal a broken leg. Shouldn't you keep at least 500 gold in reserve before you start giving your money away? Anyway, I'm just saying. I do appreciate the fact that they are good aligned though, because I've been watching some hidden alignment streams or more clearly evil streams, and I find I tend to prefer the good alignments morally and mentally most of the time because I have pretty strong morals, but I do enjoy some neutral or even evil fun now and then. I just have to be in the right mood mentally to handle it. So for example, there's a Between Two Rivers campaign, but the characters are pretty evil, so unless I'm in the mood for it, I haven't even finished the second episode yet. And also, Critical Role's a bit iffy with the hidden alignments happening right now, so I never want to miss a critical role, but honestly, sometimes it's nicer to have heroes that are good aligned. So I do recommend Highrollers for the fact that they are good alignments and the fact that they try not to just go in and kill everything every 2 segments. There aren't that many episodes available, but Heroes of the Veil, which is done more officially by Dungeons & Dragons, has good alignments more from what I've seen so far, so they're more heroic heroes. And it also has really good players and dungeon masters, so I do recommend that one as well. Unfortunately, this week's was canceled, but I do recommend that one as well if you want something more good aligned. I think that it doesn't really matter as much as long as everyone's having fun, but you really need to be on board with the morality of what's going on, and if you're playing a D&D campaign, you need to set Session 0 up with ground rules about what alignment everyone's playing, what things are no-nos, what things are okay, because some people are sensitive to certain things or just don't want a certain tone in the game they're playing, so everyone should be on the same page. which brings me to the next point. People being afraid to play Dungeons and Dragons because they think it's difficult or they're worried about various issues. So the session 0 argument, so before you even start playing, is very important because you can establish ground rules. You can make sure everyone knows if there's something you don't feel okay with, such as detailing torture or involving rape in any description. There's certain red flags, or people being eaten, or sentient creatures eating others for food being overemphasized, or having any players in the party be evil aligned at all, because these are perfect examples of things that might ruin someone's fun in a campaign, and that's perfectly valid. If these things are not your cup of tea, you shouldn't be playing in a game or even watching a stream that involves those things. It's perfectly valid for you to want something to be within a moral scope that you can handle mentally or that you'd enjoy more. So if you can find a group of players and a dungeon master with a campaign that's being run either online or in person that has the kind of play you're looking for. So even if you're not concerned with what alignment the players in your party are, you still have to have a reason for the party to work together, and it should be in a world that everyone who's playing is happy in. So if the dungeon master wants to run a game with low magic, very little magic items, slow level up progression, and with certain races not even present, and all the players want to play a campaign with high magic, lots of reward, and they want to play tieflings, but there's no tieflings in that DM's world, this is a mismatch. So you really do have to find the right dungeon master and players for you. Now, if it's difficult, you may want to talk about compromise. So if you just really want to play a human and there are no humans in that world, you might have to find a way of explaining how you're the only human in that world. For example, in the Between Two Rivers campaign, she was the only human, one character, and she explained that she was literally created in a mad wizard's laboratory as an experiment. If I get back to Highrollers specifically for a minute, where this character's from, this is a character played by the Dungeon Master. It's a non-player character, or NPC. She showed up as a bounty hunting, kickboxing beastwalker, a type of little bit animal person that exists on this world, the world of Aerois. And she was really cool, and she has southern United States accent from southern United States. And she was there to help recover the missing daughter of a wizard she'd been hired by. She was really interesting and bold. She was very openly sex positive, which I appreciate about her character. I don't really like sexual repression, so I really appreciate how sex positive she was. And I also really liked how she fought. So she had a really interesting fighting style. She had metal boots that were described to be weaponized, and she kicked with them in a lethal way. So when I designed the boots for this version of Sanna, I decided to put a spiked heel on it. Now, because she has toe-tip feet that are extra elongated, so she stands on her toe tips and her feet are really long, I thought if it had a spiked heel that's been weaponized, that heel would stay sharp and not actually reach all the way to the ground. So I thought that would be a good idea for the design based on what the Dungeon Master described, without adding anything like impossible outside of his description, but what actually matched and made sense. So I figured a spike heel that doesn't quite reach the ground. And I really did like how they were anthro, but they didn't have fur on them, which is a nice variety. It's kind of Final Fantasy 14-ish that way. I do really like anthros, though. That's something I definitely like. So I do like anthropomorphic things, and I don't really like people acting like there's something wrong with furries or anthro. So I have to say, the one thing I didn't appreciate about it is how much overemphasis he did on but she's not furry all over, as if that would be really bad if she was. Aside from that, I do really like Sanna. She was played by one of the players when that player's actual character wasn't there, which I think is a really good option. So from now on, I think more D&D streamers and people playing D&D should think of that. Which is to say, if a player's character wandered off or is in the wrong spot of the rest of the party because they missed a session, and then you're trying to bring them back in, but there's an NPC involved, you can have that player play that NPC until their actual character gets to the same time and same place. So having a cool fighting type frontline NPC like Sanna was really good in two ways. One, it gave the party some much needed muscle while their barbarian was out, and two, it allowed the player of said barbarian to play that character when she got back into the game while her character was in a different location. So I think it was really, really smart of the Dungeon Master to do that, and I think that it's a good tip people can keep in mind as a Dungeon Master and in a way as a player. So I really think I'm going to keep that in mind for my own games, and I think other people should too. I think the most important thing for a Dungeon Master is to make sure to stay true to their overall vision for their world while remaining flexible and compromising on what things are available in that world for the sake of the players. So for example, if you originally were going to build a world with, we'll say again, no tieflings and no Aasimar for some reason, but multiple players that are going to play in your campaign want to play tieflings or Aasimar and really like the lore of those races, you might either have to change your world or explain how those individuals got there through some special means. I think it's seriously worth considering changing the lore of your world if a lot of your players want something. If your vision for your world as a Dungeon Master and world builder is too different from what the players want to play in, I don't think you should play in that world. You shouldn't compromise your world too much. You should save that world for a different campaign, a different group of players, or a story you write yourself that isn't played as a Dungeons & Dragons game. That way you can preserve the integrity of your vision without compromise. In such a case, I highly recommend you create a new world entirely based on the player's wishes. There's no limit to our imagination and world building, so if one world doesn't suit a campaign, make another. As an additional tip for Dungeon Masters hoping to start out, you really do have to study the rules and look into things. But if you're going to do 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, like most of these streams are, the rules are quite easy to get into. There's a lot of simple things, and you can always remember to just give advantage and disadvantage in situations where it suits it, and to also learn as you go along. If you make a mistake, that's fine. Don't sweat it. Move on. If you learn the proper rule, start applying it from then on, rather than affecting things retroactively. I think an important tip is to not get overly bogged down or stressed out. Another tip I would give people is to make a lot of random charts, tables, and cards to help you improvise things. I think it should more be based on players' decisions, and over-preparing is a serious issue. If you have a world really planned out with NPCs, detailed maps, locations, and your players want to go in a direction you haven't mapped out, consider moving parts of the map in that direction. Change your map, change where things are, change the name of a town and reskin it. If you had planned out a whole city and the players really don't look like they're gonna go there, rename the city and move it to another spot. That way all that planning wasn't wasted. But as I said, you can overplan things. Now for more stuff about the actual Highrollers campaign that this is a fan art from. So there are a few people in the party, and as I said, the best thing about this party to me is the world and the fact that they're good aligned. Ayla is the most prepared, heroic, and reasonable of the entire party. She actually has gear to handle things, she understands how dangerous the world is, and is willing to fight things aggressively when they act aggressively. I haven't seen her go too aggressive, but I think that's a possibility with her. She's a powerful barbarian who is a member of a mysterious clan that has electrical powers. She's searching for her real origins and is a wild elf. Quill has the worst luck and has seemed to get the most injuries and trouble. He's a timid, somewhat cowardly bard cleric who doesn't admit he has his own natural magic, even though he clearly does, and is far too humble for his own good. He only has one wing, and that began before the campaign, so even though he's a short-lived birdman, he doesn't get to take advantage of the one thing going for Aarakocra and get to fly. It's really sad, but when he explains what happened, it's really built into the character and makes you hope he can get his wing fixed someday. Generally, he's very interesting, and I do wish he'd get a bit more bold, but in general, it is still a very interesting character. Lucius is a high elf daddy's boy from the rich folk who isn't really prepared to be an adventurer, but he's actually a powerful arcane chromat sorcerer, which is a really cool specialized subclass invented by this dungeon master for this world that uses colors in the magic. Sometimes his cowardice gets in the way of him acting in battle, but most of the time he's actually pretty badass and still acts when he could be scared. So while he's still scared, he'll still act in battle, which is better than not acting or being truly cowardly. Another member of the party is Sentry, who is of a race called the Guardians, which is an ancient, robotic, artificial construct, magically alive race. The player's more new to Dungeons & Dragons, but I think she still does quite decently. And one of the better things about Sentry is that she cares about protecting others and she's not cowardly. She's more likely to actually go into battle and do things, which is very, very helpful for this party in particular. I really do wish she'd use healing abilities more strategically. There were a couple times when she probably should have used Lay on Hands to help people out when she instead decided to go aggressive, but that was all up to player decision and what was going on at the time, so I don't want to be too nitpicky. The last member of this as unnamed group of adventurers is Nova. Now Nova is an air genasi, and she's more of a scientist character who was going someplace to do research when she got landed in this whole lowlands adventure thing. And her goal is to figure out what's going on with this magical sword that seems to have an alien entity in it. And she's more interested in science for science's sake, regardless of what the gods want, the consequences, or the risks involved, which suits her class as a Pact of the Tome warlock. She has a special sword that's part of a larger alien entity, and it's very interesting, actually. She links in with the world quite a bit, and her story adds a lot of interest and depth to the world. Nova, however, happens to be a bit of a coward and has actually gotten the party into trouble a few times. I think it's part of just who she is as a character, part of her flaws, but I'm really hoping overall this entire party becomes more adventurous. And what I mean by that is they learn from their experiences. As they level up, they also level up as characters in another way. They'll become braver, bolder, more adventurous, realize how to use their powers and abilities more tactically. And so far they've actually been getting a bit better. Every episode has been better than the last in several ways. So I'm hoping that this upward trend continues and that the players learn from their mistakes and learn from their triumphs and actually allow their characters to grow as people. Because they're good aligned and because they have a lot of room for character growth, those are two really good things about this entire campaign. The other thing is definitely the Dungeon Master in the world. The world of Aerois and the Dungeon Master's skills are absolutely the best thing so far about this campaign. And is absolutely why I decided to do an NPC as the first fan art rather than one or a group shot of all the players. I'm probably going to do some of the player characters later, as I said though. Now, this world is sort of Final Fantasy inspired, but Final Fantasy doesn't own the rights to mixing interesting science fiction in with standard fantasy elements. Nobody owns that. That's a basic concept. I really do enjoy this world, its history, its unique gods and lore, the beastwalker race, the guardian race, the story there. There's a few things I don't like about it, and I think I'm going to talk about that just because of personal preference. I do appreciate that it's a consistent story he's written, and I agree that it's his choice as an author, but I, in general, never like reducing lifespans. I like to have lifespans of every sentient race that a player character plays be at least equivalent to human lifespan, because anything less than that depresses me on a fundamental level. So I would raise the minimum lifespan of an Aarakocra, for example, up to human lifespan, and I would never reduce the lifespan of something that lives longer. So he reduced the elven lifespan from being really cool to only about 150 years, and I don't really like that. But I do respect that it's his choice as an author and a world builder to do so, and it doesn't stop me from watching the game or the campaign or enjoying the world of Aerois. For me, I'm really hoping that he does write a world book that I can purchase sometime soon for this, so I can use elements I like from it. The other thing I'm really enjoying about this campaign is the fact that it has an injury table, so it's pretty brutal in that way. I do really appreciate how in the last episode it changed so that injuries only happen on when a hit point of a person falls to 0 instead of a critical hit. So whenever someone takes an injury, they have something more permanent happen to them than just getting knocked out. And they roll a Constitution saving throw when they fall to 0 hit points that I believe is based on how much damage they took. And I think the DC is usually something like 10, so it's not that hard to beat, but it's not impossibly difficult to beat either. And it's, something you might have to deal with. So maybe strategically don't let yourself get knocked unconscious. The fact that it used to happen on critical hits was more unfair, so I'm happy it changed. But it adds a lot of gritty realism into a general campaign that's not necessarily as hard as 5th edition D&D tends to be a bit soft, with players mysteriously magically healing all their hit points on a long rest. For me, in my home games, I've changed a couple things even with 5th edition for house rules. I'm considering adding the injury table in by getting a hold of it somehow or writing my own version. But one of the things I changed is that I don't let people just get all their hit points back on a long rest, and I do things a bit different with hit dice. I only let some of the hit points come back on a long rest, and it depends on what level the people are at for how much I allow, and it depends on the quality of the rest. So if you're in a soft bed and it's high quality and you feel very safe and you can get the full rest easily, then you'll get more hit points back than if you're in danger, barely resting. And I allow people to use magical healing right before going to sleep to boost how much healing they get while they sleep. So if you use up the rest of your spell slots, just say a cleric, on various people in the party and magically heals them right before they go to sleep, I usually let that be double or triple the hit points they'd heal right after they do a long rest. And I use the hit dice a bit differently as well. I just find I can't explain it otherwise. I have to have it make sense. The reason a party's together has to make sense. The villain's motivations have to make sense. The fact that this ancient tomb hasn't been raided a million times before and still has stuff in it has to make sense. Everything has to have a logical consistency or verisimilitude to me. It has to make sense. And I find anything that makes sense like that is something I appreciate much more in all works of fiction that I enjoy. On a related topic to lifespan length, the Guardian race has a huge problem in this world. They are truly alive and are mysterious constructs from the past, but unfortunately a flaw with their build allows them to only live 15 years unless they're recharged. They can be recharged. If they're not recharged, they don't die, they go feral, which is a serious design flaw. One of the biggest issues in this campaign is Sentry, their guardian friend, is pretty close to going feral, in that she only has 2 more years of activity or she'll start going crazy and feral, unless she finds a way to recharge. The reason why I don't have too much of a problem with this is because it's a constructed race and it creates an opportunity for adventure, and it creates opportunity for her and her party to go out and find a way to save her, to recharge her, and that creates adventure. But it's still sad and depressing, but if they can find a solution and fix all the surviving guardians, then that becomes a campaign goal that betters the world. So things that add more adventure are good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't mind that it was a bit of a long ramble meandering around Dungeons & Dragons and stream-related issues. Goodbye!